Physical needs. When we are discouraged and depressed, we should make sure we have had proper nourishment and sufficient physical rest. Here's Gene.
Now, this is a very important principle, and it's related to a very significant prayer that the Apostle Paul prayed for the Thessalonians. And I'm going to take you immediately to a passage in 1 Thessalonians, chapter 5, verse 23. Here's Paul's prayer. Now may the God of peace himself sanctify you completely, and may your spirit, soul, body be kept sound and blameless for the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. Now the fact of the matter is that Elijah needed help. He needed help in understanding spirit, soul, and body. He needed understanding in relationship to these three dimensions of our life. Because you see, what we have here are integrated entities. We can look at each one of these individually, but it's an integration within our lives. Body, that's the physical. We all know what that means. Body, the physical. The soul, which I believe refers to the mental and to the psychological. And to the spirit, that is, to the spiritual part of our life. You know that Jesus Christ in his humanness actually grew in all of these areas. When it said Jesus grew in favor with God, in favor with man, he grew physically, he grew spiritually, he grew psychologically. Even Jesus in his humanity grew in all of these areas. And actually probably can identify, not probably, he can identify with everything we face in his humanness and how that affects us in our Christian lives. That's why he's such a wonderful, great high priest. But let's go back to Elijah. Let's go back to the way in which the Lord dealt with healing in his life. Let's take a look at 1 Kings 19, verses 5 and 6. Then he lay down and he slept under the broom tree. And suddenly an angel touched him. The angel told him, "Get up and eat." Now that's a very interesting statement. Get up and eat. And then he looked, and there at his head was a loaf of bread baked over hot stones and a jug of water. Isn't that incredible? After sleeping for a long time, recouping physically, he awakened, and there was this bread that had been baked over hot stones. There was this jug of water. See, God is taking care of him physically. So we read, he ate and he drank and he lay down again. See, the restoration process is still going on, the restoration physically. And so in 1 Kings 19, continuing in verse 7, then the angel of the Lord returned for a second time and touched him. He said, "Get up and eat." There again, you have the second statement in terms of nourishment. Get up and eat, or the journey will be too much for you. So he got up, he ate, and he drank. And then we read what happened. Then on the strength from that food, he walked 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. And there we need to realize that that mountain of God is where God revealed himself, Mount Sinai, and delivered to the children of Israel the Ten Commandments and spoke to them from that very mountain. And here Elijah now is going south, and then he's going west towards Egypt, and he's going to this situation there at the mountain of God. And notice it says, he entered a cave there and spent the night. Now, he's making progress. He's walking. He's no longer saying, I want to die, as far as we know. But he's moving very slowly. Because from that point to walk 40 days and 40 nights means he is trudging very, very slowly. He should have made that trip in a much greater period of time. But he's still exhausted. You're going to see it took a lot of time and process for this healing to take place in his life. And so it is true, I think, in our own lives It takes time for restoration. And the interesting thing is that the Lord began with the physical because He knew He needed restoration physically before He can begin to experience restoration psychologically and before He could then experience restoration spiritually. The root problem was in this area of the physical, and God understood that. And that's true in our own lives. I love what Jesus said to the apostles on one occasion. In Mark chapter 6, verses 30-31, the apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to Him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a remote place and rest for a while." Now, the apostles, as they came to Jesus, they had been intensely involved in ministry. And Jesus recognized that they needed nourishment. They needed rest. And so we read there, for many people were coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. In other words, they hadn't taken enough nourishment in their bodies to be able to withstand all the pressure that they were feeling, and Jesus really understood that. And Jesus understands that, obviously, in our own lives. Jesus understands that psychological and spiritual restoration begins with the physical. And that's a great lesson we can learn from Elijah. So, here's a reflection and response question. Why is it so important to understand this principle, especially since some Christians conclude that all psychological issues are caused by spiritual problems? There are a lot of people that get confused about that. A lot of people that don't understand that. I remember a seminary student came to me one time. A seminary student. He was studying for the ministry. And he came to my office and he said, "I've got doubts about God. In fact, I'm not sure He even exists." Now, this is a seminary student preparing for the ministry. And I asked him, I said, "Well, how much rest are you getting?" Well, he'd been up studying 2 successive nights. He hadn't had rest for about 48 hours. And I said, "I tell you what I want you to do. I want you to go to the cafeteria or go somewhere and eat a good meal. And then I want you to go to bed. And I want you to stay in bed until you can't sleep anymore. And then I want you to get another good meal. If you're still tired, I want you to get more rest. But I want you to get back on a regular schedule of rest. And then come back and see me." I remember about a week later, he came back. Guess what? God exists. Things are back to normal. See, that's what happened to Elijah. And it's so important that we understand the focus of the problem. Now, what if I had said to him, "You're a seminary student and you're doubting that God exists? Why are you here? What's wrong? There's got to be sin in your life." What would have happened? I would have just pushed him down deeper in his despair. So we need to really be sensitive. And God was sensitive to that. God didn't send an angel and say, "Elijah, what are you doing? Lying here saying you want to die. Elijah, don't you remember everything I did for you? Elijah." God didn't do that. He just put him to sleep. Then He fed him, put him to sleep, fed him again. And he went in the strength of that for 40 days and 40 nights. And so let's remember this very, very important principle that grows out of the life of Elijah at this moment. When we're discouraged and depressed, we should make sure we have had proper nourishment and sufficient physical rest.